What is up, everybody? Welcome to Bettor Golf Podcast. I'm your host, Spencer Aguiar. As you can see, Nick Bretwish had to be on a business trip today. He will not be joining us, but I am very excited to have my man Byron Lindeque on the show, as the two of us will be taking you through the board for this week's Memorial Tournament. But before we get started, I do very quickly want to talk to everyone about Underdog Fantasy, the proud sponsor of this podcast. Underdog is now offering their new Pick 8 special, where you can add 8 selections to your Pick'em entry and win up to 325 times your money. Code BGP also gets you an additional first-time deposit offer of up to $250 in bonus cash. Byron, what is up, dude? I know we weren't able to do the Roto Ballers show together this week. It's nice to finally get together here and talk about the golf, and it's going to be like if anybody out there likes our Roto Ballers show that we put together, it's going to be that just at the very end of the week where we have ownership, we know where odds have moved. We're going to be able to have the same discussion just with all the pieces now finally in place.
Yes. I feel like this show, Spence, is like when you have an outright that makes the cut and then lands up winning. You know, like we missed our Roto Baller show to start the week, but weren't really planning on doing this together. And then I get a message from him like, hey, all right, here we go. So happy to be on the other side of the mix and just looking to really just enjoy being a passenger today.
I mean, as you can tell, and anybody out there watching, like Nick is usually the one that takes care of all the background stuff. And we started the show, and I don't know what everybody sees out there, but on my end, I have a huge black screen in the back here. And maybe I'll try to fiddle around with this and see if I can find some of the better golf stuff. But that's usually Nick's doing on that. But I don't think we need to spend too much time today talking about the course. Like if you've made it to Wednesday and you're still taking in golf content, I'm under the assumption you know exactly how this venue is going to play. Is there anything that has maybe you've not talked about a lot this week? Anything at all that you would like to mention about this course?
I think, Spence, it's going to play very difficult this year.
Yeah.
I think with the wind, I think that's just going to be how it's going to be. And I feel like maybe Jack, of all places, won't let it get out of control. You know, like he won't let the PGA walk over him and let him like set the course up easy and cut the rough down. You know, I think we'll be fine. Like I'm loving the scoring environment being low this week. You know, I think we're going to lean into that a lot.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've talked about in articles and on podcasts so far. You're going to have Jack front and center pulling all the strings. We've gotten a lot of tournaments this season where the PGA Tour has really made this simple for the golfers. You're getting winning scores that are moving into the high 20 under par range. And from a viewership perspective, and we can have a discussion how I would rather there be 156 players here. I'd rather there be a cut. That's what this tournament is missing. But I do think there's going to be challenge. You're going to have somebody who's probably going to, over the first 2 days, shoot a total that takes that 10-shot rule out of play. That's kind of my prediction with that. And so we're going to have top 50 in ties. Whatever that number ends up being, you're still going to have the vast majority of the players that are going to make it into the weekend. But let's move into the board, Byron. And let's start in this $10,000 section. So we have 4 players here. Starting up, obviously, Scotty Scheffler, 12,500. Rory McIlroy, 11,100. Xander Schauffele, 10,900. Victor Hovland, 10,200. I see pretty flat ownership outside of Scotty. Scotty's going to be over 30%. The other 3 for me are in this 18 to 22% range. Do you see anything different than that? Is there a specific route that you want to go in this section?
I'm seeing Vic like in the 15-ish range. So that's exciting to me a little bit. You know, that at least means that if he does push to 18, it's not going to be 18 pushing to 21 kind of thing. So I think the 18 is a nice number. Anything south of 20 is cool on Victor. And that's the most exciting to me. I have that outright on Vic this week. So I'm thinking status quo. Like I'm imagining he walks onto this property this week feeling as good as he did after the PGA Championship when he left last year. You know, I anticipate that. An 18-1 was a nice number. $10,200, nice number. 15 to 18% ownership, nice number. You know, like there's a lot to like about Victor Hovland, in my opinion. Although my model isn't a fan.
Where does your model have him ranked?
11th, you know, so, but it doesn't know what I know. It's like, it's not taking in just the changing the coach, you know, and that immediately something so substantial changing so quickly with one variable altering.
Let's say that you want to start a build at the very top with Scotty Scheffler, because I do think this is still a doable route at 12,500. It does make a build very specific. And we had Pat Mayo on the PGA Draftcast yesterday, and I kind of liked the route that Pat went with his build. He went stars and scrubs to the max. He played Hovland and Scotty, and he just went down into essentially the $6,000 range. I think he had Kitty at 7,000 also. But is there a specific route if you start a build with Scotty Scheffler, assuming that that is still in play for you this week? Is there a specific route that you are wanting to take? Is there a secondary player? Because we can have the discussion. There's a lot of $6,000 golfers that are going to very naturally get paired with him. I think if you can deviate away from that, you're already ahead of the game a little bit.
Yeah. I think Spence, like a guy like, it will be people that I've had outrights on, like Benny On, like a Keegan Bradley, someone that I think can win this tournament that's sitting at $8,400, $7,700. I think that's going to be where my next guy goes, because I'm still looking for really good golfers. And although it's a signature event and the pricing is pretty soft, there's still tiers to this all, and finding the value guys down in the sixes is going to be the guys that are obvious, for the most part. So that's the difficult part with this all.
Yeah, I have a couple golfers in the sixes that I think are interesting, that are going to carry less ownership than a lot of these other names. I guess the problem that comes into play is when you do go this boom or bust or stars and scrubs mentality, you're going to have to be very precise. I know that this, and I'm going to just keep calling it a no cut, even though, yes, it's top 50 in ties, but these like virtual no cut tournaments, you need every single golfer in these large field contests to land at the very top of the board. You're not going to be able to have one of these golfers come in 47th place and be okay with it. And I tend to think that when people are making builds in these sorts of tournaments like this, that is the one mistake that consistently gets made by gamers. And
yeah,
I don't know if that necessarily means that you can't go Scotty Scheffler and Hovland, or I assume Scheffler and Morikawa will carry some ownership to them, but I would want a very small player pool, and I would want to feel comfortable with a couple golfers down there that are going to be able to create leverage for a build that's already going to be very chalky with the way I've started it.
Yeah. And Spence, this isn't like a signature event at Pebble Beach, which everyone in the field, Peter Malnati, can succeed at. This is Muirfield Village, which is one of the most difficult venues on the roto in windy conditions. It's going to be a major type situation, and there's a bunch of guys in this field that aren't going to cut it. You can tell now that they're not going to play well.
Do you have, before we move on into the 9,000s, of these four golfers, how would you power rank them?
Out of a DFS game theory ranking system, I would go Victor is going to be my number one player. Then I'm going to go to Xander, Scotty, Rory.
I'll still say Scotty number one. I have a really hard time not wanting to use him this week. This is a very standard answer, and there's a reason why he's going to be 35% plus owned. I ran 7 categories this week. He was number one in 6 of those categories. The one category that he wasn't number one in, he was number 2. This is a really strong tournament for him. I've talked quite a bit this week that Muirfield, inside of my model, de-emphasizes putting much more than most courses do. And I don't want to say this is a team no putt sort of an event, but if you're telling me that putting is de-emphasized even to the slightest margin, this is the Scotty Scheffler runaway. Like, he loses 8 strokes putting last year at this event and nearly still takes down the title. The ball striking is so elite. I don't want to tell anybody out there for specifically this event that he's not in play. I just think you need to be cognizant at the end of the day of exactly how you're making builds. So I'd probably still say Scotty's my favorite, regardless of where the ownership is. I'll say Xander for me is 2, and then it's probably a coin flip between Rory and Hovland. My model has Hovland 5th overall. It has him 9th for upside. That's probably more of where you are. Like, the upside numbers are more where that overall rank is for you at 11th there. But you do see the market trending, unfortunately, against Hovland in a lot of these spots. And when my model is agreeing with the market there, it does start pushing me in a different direction.
Yeah, I think Spence, though, I'm still shooting for his upside value, which at this price and betting odds, etc., are still fair. You know,
I agree.
we're not betting him for a top 10. I'm not betting him for a top 20. I'm betting him top 5 and to win. I'm playing him in DFS as a $10,200 golfer who's a defending champion. That's how I'm looking at it. At a golf course that's very sticky. And so I'm excited. I'm excited to see what he can do because he's fun to have in the mix, man. Like he's a fun rival for Scotty Scheffler, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, each one of those golfers inside of the top 5 of my overall rank. So you're not talking about any natural fade candidates. They all make sense.
Yeah.
You're just going to have to pick your poison. But as we move into the 9,000s, there's a lot, in my opinion, to discuss here because Colin has gained so much steam since Monday, where he is going to arguably be potentially the second highest owned player on the board. How do you view, I guess my first question would be, Byron, how do you view him compared to the big 4 in this tournament? And then how do you view that ownership compared to everybody else that's in this range?
Spencer, I'm a fan of Colin because I'm starting a few lineups with Victor Colin because that leaves you with the same amount as a Scotty Scheffler click for your 4 guys, and then you've got to fit 5 guys in the same pool to Scotty there. So I'm pairing him with Vic, who's low owned, which is the fun part there. That's watering down that 20% a little bit. He's been so good here, Spencer, and his short game is amazing now, and we can expect that. Do you want to be ahead of Colin Morikawa's irons returning? Because when they do, shit's going to get real, like with the odds. Because when his irons start becoming world number 1 iron caliber again, and the short game remains that we've seen, the world of golf is kind of bubbling right now, Spence, and there's some guys that can burst onto the scene and start rivaling Scotty because their games are coming together. I think Colin's one of these dudes, dude.
Yeah, it's the ebbs and the flows of golf to begin with. We've seen every elite player over the past, 10 years. Like we can date this back to Jason Day and Jordan Spieth in like 2014, 2015. Dustin Johnson had his run. John Rahm went through his little run. You have a player for these very short periods of time who become the best player on the planet, and there's really nobody that close. And Scotty, I think the big difference is here is statistically, he is the most ahead of any of these other golfers that I've ever had in my model. I think for me, from running my math over the past, I've been in this space now since 2018, and I've been releasing my model over at Rotoballer for about that amount of time now. Like the only person that kind of carried that similar mentality was Dustin for a while, where my model thought Dustin was the clear-cut number 1 player in the world. And that was at times, like even if we date this back closer to like the 2015 time frame, and we can talk about the choke that he had at Chambers Bay and some of those things, but my model thought he was the best player in the world at that moment, and it took a little bit longer for him to put the pieces together. But I do agree. I think we're going to have players this summer that are going to jump out and start rivaling him. Morikawa's game, now specifically that he's learned how to putt and chip, and that's not this deficiency anymore that it used to be. I really like him. I bet him at 16-1 when this opened. I think that the ownership is perfectly fine with where we're at right now. You talked about potentially pairing him with Hovland. That's what I was going to do on the draft cast yesterday before Pat ended up taking Hovland from me. Yeah. I think my biggest problem, or where I run into some issues with this $9,000 range, is when you get beneath Colin, you have Ober, Cantlay, Thomas, Fleetwood, Hideki. There's a little bit of ownership that's coming into play for a couple of these names, and you can find some leverage if you go in the route of a Fleetwood, for an example here. But I guess I'll give you a 2-part question here, Byron. The first part of this would be, is there a player that you were just completely out on? And then the second question that I would ask you is there anybody that you think that you can create leverage to the field with?
I'm out on Ludwig. The performance at the PGA Championship and the knee still being an issue, no bueno. I don't know what's going on, and I'm seeing him like 16-17%. So if that's the case with him and he's still injured, he could have a WD in a essentially a no-cut event. It's 50 guys still make it, but the majority of the guys you speak about will be making the cut, yeah. But Ludwig, likely of all of these guys, has the highest miscut potential, at 16%. So I'm happy to take that off my plate and let him beat me in a field that I think other guys can hang out with him still, if he's still playing well. So, for instance, Patrick Cantley, who maybe it's the complete opposite, not playing well right now, but going back to a venue where Patrick Cantley plays well. And we've seen his course history is very sticky for himself, his DNA. He plays well at courses he plays well at on repeat, like you can make a really sick looking chart of results if you just filter on the right courses. So this is one of them. And we could, in certain contests, maybe the lower owned, smaller contests, get a Patrick Cantley that's single digit owned, So to me, that's where I'm kind of leaning.
Yeah, the two most volatile players for me would be Oberg and Thomas. I guess I'd be more inclined to go down the Thomas route. Some of the long-term data is going to hurt him, and I can understand that when I build my model, and we can have this same conversation about Sungjae in a second, where I think the metrics are starting to turn around for them, and I understand the support that they're garnering in the space. I think the problem with Oberg really comes down to this boom or bust potential that's in my model, and I don't want to make this like he doesn't have upside. From a statistical fit perspective for the venue, there's a lot to like about him. He's fourth in my sheet in weighted tee to green for Muirfield. He's inside of the top 5 for projected scoring. The problem on the flip side of that answer, though, is he is injured. There is a lot of ownership around him. And when you take those, and I actually would say, too, the price tag is a little bit higher than it probably should be, even when you base the stats into account here. Like, I had him as a golfer that should have been, and we're talking very thin margins here, but a golfer that should have been at the very bottom end of this $9,000 range, like 9,000 flat or 8,900, somewhere in that section. So he's a couple $100 too expensive, and he's going to be a top 12, 13 owned player on the board. I'm just fine letting that profile beat me this week. I would not be shocked if he put it together and found some results, but I don't necessarily want to get forced into an option of a guy who's wearing chunky knee braces. And I know that we can say now that he looks fine and his swing looks okay. And I've seen videos of him and that's all great, but throw him onto a course that's going to have luscious rough and you get there and for 4 days and all of a sudden you tweak something or you do something else and you have a 15% owned Oberg. There's some problems that can come in from just withdrawal potential with it. So I'm not going to play him. He's probably the one that I'm most out on. The one that I want to ask you about, because this is going to be the leverage play. If you're looking to pivot and try to find a difference here, I do think Tommy Fleetwood at 9,100 is kind of interesting. And this comes down to where he's a darling last week. He provides a perfectly fine result. In the perception of everybody's mind here, he's too overpriced. And that's why people don't necessarily want to play him, in my opinion. But like at sub 10%, I know that the results here, he has not played this tournament in a bunch of years. And when he has played it, he hasn't been great. But he does have the total driving that I would want to see with absolutely no ownership. Do you have any thoughts on Tommy?
I've got a lot of resentment towards Tommy Fleetwood, Spencer. I doubled my unitage on him to top 10 last week. Enters round 4, inside the top 10. Round 4, hole 1, double bogey. Yeah. Didn't sniff the top 10 again. Prior to that, had a top 10 on him again. And then, what do we have? A disaster. So, it's just, he's been letting us down the stretch. Like that's the thing with him. He's just like running out of steam. He's like old manning it down. Like he's just limping home for some reason. So, I don't know. Like, again, at the RBC Canadian, the guy should have contended to win that tournament and he didn't. Like, what are we doing? I've got a bit of resentment now. So I have, to answer your question though, I've been playing him a lot leading up to this. So if that helps you.
Well, it's the resentment answer. It's the not providing the results that are paying off both the ownership and the price tag. And you do that enough times over and over again at a price tag here where I think the consensus with the public is it's a little bit too high. You run into these spots where leverage gets created. And for me, I'm always willing, where my model is very, There's 7 players this week that graded inside of the top 30 of my model for every single category that I ran. Every single one of those golfers is a positive value compared to their DraftKings price, other than one player, or at least within a spot or two. Like, you're right in the range there. Besides one player, the one player that was technically overpriced is Tommy Fleetwood. And I agree, but there is a difference between being overpriced and overowned, and overpriced and underowned where there's leverage there. So I think there's a leverage potential where he can give you a top 10 result. We don't need that victory from him necessarily. He can pair well with a lot of options. He pairs well. If you can find a way to put him and Scotty into a build together and build from there, you're going to be different with that Scotty build. So I like Fleetwood. I would say he's probably my second favorite option in this range. I see James asking about Billy Ho. We can get to that when we get to the $7,000 section. So we'll be sure to answer that question. Zach is talking about the audience last night. Like, Joel went full heel. I like Sia did that for a very short period of time to where he started doing it. And I think Joel saw that and realized that he can have full control over the situation. And I don't know how those two can ever get paired together. I saw you in the chat last night, Byron, but that was wild.
It was unacceptable. Joel needs to be brought to the people's court. A petition needs to be made.
I got to be honest with you. I didn't think that there was going to be anybody this season on that show that was going to get thrown under the bus from the audience more than Sia did with some of the moves that he did. But it took Joel about Joel said, hold my beer. And it took about a month and a half for him to just completely one up that. So if you haven't had a chance, check it out. We had Pat Mayo on. It was a really good show. He added a bunch of insight, and I'll let you right now, Byron, talk as we move forward about a little of the stuff that you do with Pat. I know that you've been doing a bunch with him recently.
Yeah, I've moved back 9 bets now, which is presented by Rotoballer, to Mayo Media Network now. So it's on Mayo, and that's going to be moving there for episode 104. Currently did 101 this week. So I'll be doing both back 9 bets and Mayo until 104. And then it's completely going to be on Mayo. And then I do the Fantasy Golf Degenerates show with Kenny, which I took over from Tambo, which was some big shoes to fill. So we completely kind of changed the script there and kind of took a little less DFS approach and a bit more betting for me. And I think that's the way to go. I'm not going to try pretend to be Tambo, so we just made it a little bit of me show and not everybody's favorite South African. So looking forward to a fun relationship with Kenny and all of his stories and fun stuff over there.
I've always said before, like, if you can be organically and naturally yourself in every single spot, it comes across so much better than trying to be something that you're not on these shows. And it's a very good show with you and Kenny and all the work that you do with Pat. So if you're not doing so already, check that out. And as Byron said, you can find all of his work over at Rotoballer. Use the code Maniac there, and you can get everything that he has going there.
Thank you, Spence. Thank you, buddy.
So as we get into the $8,000 section, I'll say this at the very start. And I understand that in a virtual no-cut tournament, you're looking for golfers, in my opinion, specifically for GPPs that do have high ceilings. The floor outcome here, I'm willing to take some chances, but I am much lower than even the consensus seems to be. Like, I see him at 9% right now. I understand the upside. I'm probably out on Wyndham Clark. Do you have thoughts on? I have a matchup. It was the very first bet that I placed this week, which is a wild price and a wild pairing when you look at some of the stuff. I bet Tony Finau against Wyndham at -120, and we moved that number at Rotoballer to -140 in the span of like seconds. I don't know where it's gone to since that moment. It usually ends up moving back into reason at some point, but
Spencer, I'm in, dude. I'm in. I've got gnats flying around me. That's how greasy I feel doing this, but I think Wyndham, Spencer, 26% of the time he's inside the top 5 in the last 12 months. Like, just play him like as a process results based play. Like, you don't have to like him this time. Would you like him at the Players? No. Like, why would you play Wyndham Clark at the Players? He would have won that tournament if it wasn't for Scotty. Like, you just have to play this guy. When he fires, he fires. He's been off a little bit, But I think we went through like a barrage of golf. He's had a long time off now, I think, a few weeks. I feel like he can find his groove again, kind of reset and go. So I'm willing to take, this is the perfect, like, I think Wyndham has way more upside than Tommy, and you're going to get the same ownership and a slight price discount. I think that's why I'm not as bullish on that 9K range as you are, because I'm a big fan of these guys in the 8s. That's where most of my outright card is, and I think, that's where you can get some serious leverage this week.
I went back and I looked because I was curious. I had Wyndham 10th for the Players' Championship, so my model did like him there. I have him 36th this week. 55th for safety, 29th for upside. So you do get some of that upside answer. It just doesn't pop enough for me. Like, I understand. I think this is a much better play than a lot of these other options that we will talk about later on that might carry more ownership. Like, I don't want to compare a golfer that's 8,900 versus one that's 7,500 necessarily. But if we're looking for pure upside with ownership that's going to be somewhat similar, like Zalatoris is going to be more popular, yep, I would rather personally play Wyndham Clark and at least know what I'm signing up for there. I'm completely out on Will Zalatoris this week. I'm out on Wyndham specifically for matchup markets.
Sure.
I think any cash game lineups, I want nothing to do with him. I agree with your sentiment that there is upside there that warrants some consideration. I just still don't think I can get there, but the ownership's great. Spencer, you're going to get an ownership discount.
Spencer, his top 5 rate is 26%. His top 20 rate is 37%. Scotty Scheffler's top 20 rate is 89. Xander's is 70. Everyone else is in the 50s, so that's the matchup side of it. You can dance the line either side of a golfer and bet certain markets to suit their profile. It's totally fine to be either side of this guy and feel the way we do.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts? I know James was saying Homa is going to contend. Thoughts on Homa this week?
Yeah. FanDuel woke up drunk and posted their lines late, and there was a 55-1 on Max Homa out there. And now I'm a holder of a Max Homa 55-1 that's got a smell of beer all over it, because that line stinks of mispricing, and now they're 40s out there again. So Max has shown up at these big events, Spencer. Like, his consistency hasn't really been there, but the Masters, we've seen him contend at Bay Hill. Like, there's been some times when he's really showing up, and I think he's really trying to get there. I think his drive is just a little off right now. If he can find that, we're looking good. Like, the rest of his game is actually firing on all cylinders. So I'm excited for that. I think he's got a good shot at trying to contend this week.
That is more of a name where, like, not to keep going back to this Wyndham Clark slander on my end here, and it's
your boy Spencer.
I have just completely trashed all my boys this week. Like,
I think you coming from a jail cell there. Is this a Scotty Scheffler tribute today? In your orange jumpsuit over there?
I'm just grouchy today, I guess, with all these players that I usually am on. I so much prefer Max Homa. I think you're getting very similar, maybe a little bit more ownership with Max. I see him more at 13%, so like 3-4% more. But look at Homa, look at Jordan Spieth. Like, I know Jordan Spieth has been all over the map, and this is a Nick special this week. And Spieth is completely boom or bust. I'm not going to have the stomach to come on here and say that Spieth is some great play, but you look at the course history here. Every other player that brings any semblance to the course history to this venue is 15% plus owned. And Spieth is going to probably be sub 10% because of the recent form that we've seen. The irons are as bad as they've ever been. There's concerns with the game, but I would rather play him. I would rather play Homa. I think we could have a conversation about Ben On. Ben On is hated in the market. For whatever reason, my model seemed to like him. I don't know where your model has Ben On this week.
I've got Benny 10th for upside, dude.
That's what, I have him 12th.
Benny, like, why? If you're looking at Benny On versus Jordan Spieth, it's night and day. It's night and day. When Adam Scott missed that chip or putt or whatever to extend his playoff stuff or the major run, he's now an alternate, but he might make it in. But the next person that will now have the longest streak is Jordan Spieth. And I was thinking, if he keeps playing like he is right now, in 2 years' time, that streak's going to be broken. He's going to be having to qualify for these freaking tournaments, dude, because he's playing so badly. He's got one really good finish in a Valero Texas Open, which is like his backyard. So good, but not going to make a big deal about that. So I'm out on him entirely, Spencer. Even at this kind of ownership, it's like I've done this before now.
There's a lot of negative rank versus price points, I guess would be the best way to explain that in my model in this $8,000 section. Like the only two players that were technically of value would be Ben On and Russell Henley. Ben On has moved in the wrong direction. When I added some of the sharp movement to my model, he still shows as a value. And there's really, I don't have ownership around him really. You can tell me where you have the ownership on Ben On, but I don't think he's going to be extremely popular.
No, he's going to be the same as Jordan Spieth. He's 11%, 12%. Like,
yeah, that's pretty much the range where I have him. So I think he's interesting. I guess the point that more so I'm trying to make is like, I would rather throw darts at the Gala, Homa, Spieth than Wyndham. Like that's just my take on this. And that's probably the one spot where we're going to be different here. Henley's going to carry a ton of ownership. There's not much that my model does not like about him. He does have negative trajectory for upside, which that is usually the one thing you don't want to see when you start buying into these really trendy, popular choices. These are more staples of cash game builds and they're, your head-to-head targets that you're looking for. But I think at the price tag, he still makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. You know what's funny, Spencer? He's the same for me. He goes backwards for upside, but he's 18% top 5 rate. That's pretty good. That's 1 in every 5 times he tees it up. He's inside the top 5 last year. Like that's a lot. 22 rounds, 22 events. So you're getting that reward for 14%. He's doing it 18%. Like I think you can match your ownership maybe to the top 5 rate of a player maybe, and decide maybe that's a good way to gauge how much you should play him. So until there's a certain price point, I think maybe you can use that as a rule of thumb. And I kind of don't mind it. He's been rewarding you for that kind of stuff at a course like this.
I agree. He's going to be in my player pool this week. There's a lot of chalk that we're going to talk about from him and like Keegan, Siwoo, and we'll move down into the 7,000.
Well, Spence, this is perfect. James says 3 chalk or not chalk, cash lineup. I mean, might as well, right? Because your cash lineup could be a chalky guy. That's where you want to play them for the most part, if you want to.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you want to throw out 3?
I would probably say Siwoo Kim, Russell Henley, Colin Morikawa.
Yeah. Yeah, Siwoo Kim is definitely there, man. Like the price versus that. I would also say Keegan Bradley as a cash game play, like cash game and strokes gained off the tee, I think are exactly what you're looking for, because the more strokes you gain off the tee, the more cuts you typically will make, because that just means less stuff will go wrong for you. And Keegan is doing stuff right now that is bananas off the tee. So I'm all in on Keegan this week. All in. I'm so excited to see what he can do, because last year you had to drive the ball well to be inside the top 10. It changes year to year. Maybe it's again like that this year. I'm hoping, because then Keegan's in good shape.
I think cash game GPP, I see 13% ownership. He's pretty much a staple of all builds of how I'm going to be making. I considered him in the outright market. I thought 70-1 was a great price.
I'm in.
Yeah, you probably did the right thing by betting him there. That number was too high. I did not add him to the card. For full disclosure, my outright card is Finau in the 60s and Colin Morikawa at 16. I technically would have a lot of room to add other players, and at a 70-1 price, he would have been very easy to add. He makes a lot of sense. Like he's inside the top 15 of my model throughout all iterations of how I ran that. And that's including safety and upside markets there. So that to me is just like, even at that 13% ownership, he's one of the best values that I have comparing his DraftKings price against my rank. And he technically has positive leverage at 13% ownership. Like he has to start pushing 16, 17% for me to start questioning it. And I don't think he's going to get there. And even if he does, like that's still a fair number for me.
He's not the right price. That, in my opinion, affects the the amount of ownership you can take on. Like if you would tell me he's $8,700 and 16-17% ownership, 13%, I'm in. But even at this ownership, it's not even that bad. So let's go, boo. Like he's been playing nicely.
And James, we want all the questions that we can possibly get. If you have anything you want to ask, and this goes for anybody out there that's tuning in, like don't be shy. We're here to answer anything possible. This is the exact structure that we do on our Roto Baller show together. If you haven't had a chance to tune into that, we're here to talk with everybody. We're here to answer questions, and we're trying to have a good time at the end of the day. So, let's talk about some of these $7,000 players, though. And I don't obviously want to list all of them. There's a plethora of names to talk about. Do you want to give me, let's say, a few of the guys that are going to be making your builds and a name or two that you want no part of this week?
Sure. Gonna make my builds. Tom Hoagie, Will Zalatoris, Shane Lowry, Keegan, and Siwoo. I think his chalkiness is also very validated, and he's putted amazing at this golf course. It's quite surreal to see how well he's actually putted for how bad of a putter he is. So to me, it's been enough of a sample for that to really kind of continue. It could always not, just because golf is golf, but I think his ball striking consistency is also just, this golf course rewards that kind of stuff. It might not give him all the upside in the world, but at this price, I'm okay with what he's going to give us.
Yeah, I keep talking about the de-emphasizing of putting, and on the very high end, there's some names we can talk about, but you have some golfers here in this $7,000 section that their ball striking is as pristine as a lot of these guys near the top. Siwoo would be one of them. Tony
Those are all my guys.
Yeah, Tony Finau's probably my favorite play on the board this week. There's a lot of similarities with what my model saw last week with Tom Kim, just with the way that I am so much higher, and he's trending in a direction right now where he's going to probably be 15% owned. And there wasn't a world on Monday where I thought we were going to get there, but I think this is DFS players and bettors in general just becoming much sharper with some of their viewpoints. And, if you find an advantage, and specifically in a tournament like this, you have to pick and choose your spots. We have just over 70 players. There's enough players that we can cut out of the player pool to make this work. And ownership's naturally going to be a little bit higher than you would expect on every single name, just because there's less options to choose from. I thought the Finau profile, and he's a name that I have talked about quite frequently this year. I will say that I haven't had an outright recommendation or a want from him in the outright market since the Houston Open. That was a tournament he came second. Look at the ball striking that he put together in that tournament. Like, it's wild he didn't win it because the putter went so cold, but inside the top 10 of my model from an overall rank perspective. The biggest intrigue, though, he jumped into the top 7 for projected win equity. That weighted strokes gain stuff, the recent tee to green metrics, he's gained just under 6 strokes per start over his last 5 tournaments. This price tag does not make sense when I am devaluing putting here. So I'm going to be very aggressive on Finau. I like your Shane Lowry shout out. I think Lowry should be a name that you keep in mind for this venue. Inside of the top 20 for me overall, we're looking at a golfer here that's priced outside of the top 20. Keegan makes a lot of sense. We've talked about Siwoo Kim. I like Sepp Straka. I worry about the ownership ever so slightly with where we're moving, but I have a round 1 play. I'll talk about it on the show. You can get it over in my Roto Baller article most weeks. I actually wrote about it at Action too, if you want to read it. But I have Sepp
big old OG tonight.
Yeah, I have Sepp Straka minus 115 over Jason Day. A lot of that has to do with Jason Day's overcorrection in the market with everything of. I know it's his home course.
It's not his home course, dude. He would never play here if he had to not to. Like he'd be terrible.
Well, that's the thing, Byron, is it's quote unquote his home course. He is on record stating that he never plays here. Like, just because it's 20 minutes away from his home and he decides he wants to walk out to the facility in his boxers today, it doesn't mean that he's actually good on this course. You look at some of these approach numbers that he's put together at this venue.
Yes.
It's as bad as you can see. He's over 2.5 strokes that he's losing every single time that he plays it. He's lost 11 of the last 12 times he's played the tournament. And then, look at the recent approach metrics that he's putting together. They're also losing over 2 shots. So I don't necessarily have anything. Yeah, I don't. Yeah,
This is a Jason Day play. If you're going to play Jason Day today.
yeah. I don't understand like the groupthink mentality that comes into play where there's not even course history to build off of from it. Like we're literally just saying the course is close to his home. Like that would be no different. I've said this many times. Like I don't mind coming on a show and giving this answer. I'm a very athletic person. Golf is not my number one strength in life. I don't play much golf. I run things from a numerical perspective and I talk about golf. It would be like me saying that because Red Rock Country Club, which is like a minute away from my home that I could walk to on the course, that would be like me saying that that is a venue that I'm going to go shoot a 60 at. Like, I might shoot a 600 on the course if we're being honest. Like, that has nothing to do with it of being able to roll out of bed and play the course. So there's been a legitimate overcorrection in the market with him.
Yeah. I mean, the ownership at 6% is fine, whatever. I still won't even play him at that, but at least in the betting markets, take advantage of him where you can, because that makes tons of sense to do that, because he's been terrible. 11 of 12, Spencer, he's lost. That's incredible.
And they're not just losing, like you can lose like a tenth of a stroke.
Yeah, it's
like
blood.
You're averaging, I don't have it up in front of me right now, and I don't know. If you give me a second, I'll get you the exact number. He's averaging like legitimately negative 2.85 shots over his last 12 appearances here. Like he's lost 2.64 since the API in March. Yeah. Everything that can go wrong.
Horrible combination.
And one of the things I always talk about is how do players perform on specific green complexes? He's a negative trajectory inside of my model for putting. That's the one thing that's saving him right now. So
I think Jason Day was the one that implemented the cut at that event, because he doesn't want to play 4 rounds, yeah, boy. He wants to get the hell out of there.
You talked a little bit about how Jason Day has no ownership, and like, yes, I agree with that. Is there anybody in the section, and maybe you've named a couple already, I'd have to go through in the ownership and look to see, but Hoagie, I have, yes, about 6%. I think you could get some leverage there.
Hoagie, 8 of 16 tournaments have been top 20s for Hoagie. At this price, 50% T20 rate, let's go, baby. I'm in.
I like Kurt Kitayama at 7,000. I think you can get some leverage there. I figure we have to at least talk about this player, and I made this comment yesterday on the DraftCast show, and I think it's at least noteworthy to bring up again here to have the conversation. When you get a nickname and you get known as Scam Young, people don't want to play you anymore. And you can see that firsthand with he's a $7,800 golfer that my model currently has at sub 10% owned. I know that he has burned a lot of people in the space, including like, I think Elise might be like the one that gets burned by him the most. Shout out to Elise.
Yeah.
And like
poor lady.
Her and or like Spieth and Cameron Young just seem to be the two
she's a defense attorney. I think she needs her own defense attorney for Spieth and Scam Young. Like
essentially. But
did you read my value plays article, Spencer? Which is like over at Rotoballer, premium product of the East Code Maniac, but Cameron Young is in there.
I like Cameron Young's upside. It's if I'm going to take a shot and bet on potential, and this is kind of the argument that I'm having in a lot of these spots where my model can be lower than consensus, but if I have a positive trajectory for upside in my sheet with no ownership that's coming in the mix, look, the goal of DFS is never to show like how smart you are compared to everybody else and eliminate an entire player pool here. There are golfers where if you're telling me they are fairly priced with an upside to their game and nobody wants to play them, fairly priced is all I need to see with Cam Young here to take a chance that he can give me a top 10 finish. We don't need a victory out of him at this number. Like, I mean, in reality, if he can just enter Sunday in 12th place and backdoor a top 5 finish, that's the perfect outcome for him.
Yes. He's got one of the highest top 10 rates in this range, So when your top 10 rate is like a fraction or like an exponentially larger than your ownership, then we're talking down here. We've spoken about how this top 5 rate and ownership can kind of intermingle with each other. I think this is the time where you're seeing the two kind of intersect with each other and the graph's going in the other direction. So you can get some serious value with them now.
I've said this before. Take guys like Cam Young, Tony Finau. I think Xander fit that bill for a really long time. I would even throw Fleetwood into there to an extent. It's these guys that have a lack of perceived win equity that get hurt with their ownership sometimes in
Ogie.
spots. Yeah, throw him into the mix. Like there's a lot of players like that where the profile of how they bring it into an event warrants a lot more consideration, but because you've gotten burned or the general public has gotten burned so many times from a player, you see Cam Young's name and it's just take the red pen and immediately cross him out. And I don't think that that's the correct way to play. We're trying to play a game against all of each other here. And we're trying to figure out a way of how can my lineup create better leverage to where, first of all, you need to get the top of the board correct, but on the plays that I'm doing, how can I differentiate from everybody else? And how can I do that to actually create leverage in my build there? And that is one of the mistakes that people make is more often than not in large fields. And I'm speaking specifically large field contests here. This is not single entries and things of that nature, but in these large field events, builds way too often turn into what should translate to a cash game.
Yes.
And that's what you don't want. Like there's a place to use a lot of these players.
Those are people, Spencer, that don't have enough money in their bank account, in their DraftKings account to survive the week and have to not put more money in and feel crappy about it. Like we all do it every now and then, but like you got to feel comfortable kind of throwing lineups away, but without being ridiculous to succeed in these big contests.
We all create content and like we all want to talk about how great DraftKings is and how great these boards are and all of this stuff. But the thing that nobody wants to discuss is the rake is really high. In order to beat a really high rake, you have to be much more aggressive than you think you need to be in these spots. The builds that end up winning are the ones where, like, if you can find your player pool and
stacked,
and you can like randomize it in a certain way, that's usually like the randomization that you would have never come up with of the players that are in that player pool are the ones that are like the pieces that get put together where it works out correctly with it. It's never the prototypical, very easy to like decipher names that like whatever the build is that wins the GPP contest this week in some of these massive contests. It's not going to be straightforward. There's going to be somebody's name that fits into that build that you got more aggressive on and you were able to put him into that lineup.
Does that build have Scotty Scheffler in it, Spencer?
I mean, to be honest with you, I always say no. I'm almost leaning towards. I'm leaning towards.
How big is this contest?
I'm talking big contest here.
I would say yes. Like if it's over 5,000 to 10,000 people in a contest, Scotty Scheffler's in that lineup.
I think you're correct with that. There's going to be names like the Kurt Kitayamas of the world, and it might not be Kurt Kitayama, but it's going to be somebody like somebody like that you're able to put into a lineup with them, and you get that piece correct enough times where you pair it with Scotty, and all of a sudden Scotty wins the tournament, and you have 5 other pieces that landed top 14 of the Tom Hoagies of the world and the names like that.
That's why, Spence, I'm doing single entries and 3 entries this week because I'm not playing Scotty. I'm doing because the combination, like the amount of lineups in that contest for it to have a Scotty in it is so much less because the combinations of the 5 people aren't as much, so I've preached that everywhere I've kind of been on with this year and it's been okay. I've been doing better, I would say, than the 150 maxes I've been trying to do. So I'm going to keep rolling with it.
Let's move into the $6,000 section. We'll keep this very short. Before I let you get out of here, I do want to run through some of Nick's overweight, underweight plays.
Oh, yes. I love those.
Yeah, you can give me your thoughts on them and we can kind of break those down one by one. But before we do that, when we look at the $6,000 section here, my model at least has, like, when we get to the very bottom here, call it 6,300 and less, I don't really have that many playable commodities that I'm super excited about. I think you could argue Cam Davis, Emiliano Grillo. Those would maybe be like the most enticing, very bottom of the board options that I would be considering. A lot of the ownership here has landed on the names that are over and over again making builds. It's Austin
Yes.
Eckroat, Lee Hodges. Everybody seems to have the same flavor that they like in the $6,000 section. I don't even want to talk about those names. You can make your own opinion if you want to play them or
Sure.
not. You need to know where, like, what kind of a build you have and what kind of a game theory route you're going with it. But
There's reasons people are playing them. We'll put it out there.
it makes a lot of sense. There's
Yeah.
there's reasons why they're popping in everybody's models. Is there somebody that has lower ownership that you like this week?
Yes. Taylor Moore is the same person as those other two, in my opinion. If you're looking at just recent form, Taylor Moore has got better recent form over the 2024 season than those other two guys. I think he's 4%, which isn't crazy, but this is a 70-person field. You're not going to be, if you're finding a 2% dude, he's likely got a lot of warts and he's ugly and he's the last chick at the dance, but you can hang out with that person until the lights come on. But Sunday the lights come on and they're bright and it's not pretty. So there's a lot of 4% is fine to kind of pretend that that's some nice solid leverage. So Taylor Moore's good there. I'm fine with that. Victor Perez, if he comes in at 4%, I think that's a solid option because he finished second last week. Like we've seen this kind of stuff. Keegan Bradley, the last time he teed up, finished second. Like we like guys that are playing well.
Do you have thoughts on Putnam versus Hodges?
Andrew Putnam's like overall safety for me is 38th and Hodges is 65th for me. Like he's really hasn't come to like full extension yet. Like I see what he's doing. The approach numbers are looking solid, but Putnam overall, if you're looking for, I think I'd still go Hodges though. To backpedal there a touch.
I would also go Hodges for that answer.
Yeah.
The best, I mean, I hesitate even talking about Eric Cole anymore on a show. I think he might just be legitimately broken. So I'm going to exclude what my model is saying on him. But the best values for me in the $6,000 section, if we throw Eric Cole out of the mix, model likes Justin Rose. I've talked about why it likes Austin Eckroat a little bit this week on different shows I've been on. Gonna have to carry some ownership with him. I like Adam Schenk. I think that to me can be a 4 or 5% owned name that you get a little bit different with your build. I see Zach asking about Bezadenhout. Any thoughts on him?
He's so interesting. I think so. I think with guys that we know are doing distance stuff, the longer the breaks in between events, the more anticipatory I am of what they can do. Their upside in my brain seems to go a bit more towards the ceiling. Like I'm a fan. So I'm in, like he's been showing some serious upside and progress. And, we've had some, why not? He's cheap. He's South African. I'm in. I'm a big fan.
I'm in also. Thoughts on James's question, Billy Ho top 20?
Yeah. Well, what's the odds? I think he's
give me 1 second.
The perfect play for us right now. Like just blindly speaking, I think I would bet him top 20s,
if you have access to Bet Online, I don't know if the number is still currently available. It looks like you can get him at plus 200 would be the best price in the market. There's a lot of plus 190s out there.
It's a negative 3% edge for me, but the course history, if you really like the course history, I can get Billy Horschel to fire up a bit better, like I like it, it's not terrible, it's not like a 9% negative edge. It's like 3. It's cool,
31 for me overall, 53rd for upside. So the statistical data doesn't necessarily love him, but where he gets saved is the course history has been magnificent. He's inside the top 20 for me in safety. And I do think that safety rating plays very heavily for some of these placement markets. So I'd have to run the numbers on it. That's not something that I've done this week with it. And I can do it after the show and let everybody know, but it would be very close based off of that.
Well, yeah, like Billy Horschel, the last 12 months is finishing inside the top 20, 30% of the time. Plus 200 is 33%, and this is a field of 73 people, dude. Like it's not a 160 person field. He's likely not going to be having to deal with the cut, hopefully. And this wasn't the event where he had his meltdown. Was he the defending champ 2 years ago, and then last year he was just playing like absolute garbage and cried on camera? Like, what is Billy Horschel's outright? Like, dude, wouldn't that be a full circle moment? Like, we've seen some serious like sob stories and Bobby Mack's daddy caddy situation, and it's like, I think, I'm in for Billy Horschel though.
Yeah, I like Horschel. From placement markets, I pretty much just didn't run numbers this week. In these 70-man fields, I never find value. Everything is always a negative value for me. And I didn't have any massive disparities in my sheet this week, even just looking at where there could be an edge. Like Finau probably would have been the closest. And then I looked at some of the numbers and the market was overly respecting him to begin with. And I pretty much went the route of let me find matchups. I have 3 pre-tournament matchups. I have all these Jason Day bets. There's a lot of questions about Day. It just comes down to the iron play. Like we've kind of talked about that already. We don't need to get into it again, but I'm fading Jason Day this week, as we've talked about.
We just somewhere over the rainbow, like halfway through the show, go and find, you'll see go look for where my hat is backwards. That's where we were speaking about Jason Day.
Yeah. Let's talk before we let everybody get out of here. Let's talk about Nick's plays. We'll run through them very quickly, Byron. I don't need a very long answer one way or another. He provides a really good overweight to fade every single week over on Twitter. You can see exactly what his player pool looks like, but his overweight options, just give me a simple yes or no. I'll do the same. Colin Morikawa.
Yes.
Yes, for me. Also, Russell Henley. I'll say yes. I hate the negative upside that's in my model, but I just think the price tag is too cheap, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's fine.
Xander Schauffele.
Yeah. Yes.
I'll say yes to Xander. Justin Thomas.
No.
I'm indifferent. I can understand why Nick is going down this route. I think it's a respectable decision. I lean towards no myself, but I think it's okay.
I think his ownership of, if I was going to look at Tommy Fleetwood and Patrick Cantley and be like, Justin Thomas, I think he'll get steamed.
That's kind of my mentality, and that's why I'm playing Tommy Fleetwood for that reason. Siwoo Kim, we've said yes to him. Keegan Bradley, we've said yes to him. Max Homa, I will probably agree with Max. We both seem to be on the same page with Straka as a yes. I mean, unless ownership gives you a different answer there.
Oh no, yes, sorry. I thought we were just cruising through names we all agree on.
We are.
Yeah.
Just making sure, double checking. We have not talked about Lucas Glover. My model loved Lucas Glover this week.
Yeah, it's kind of just like whatever for me on Glover this week. I haven't spoken about him. I haven't dissed him. I haven't tried to fade him. He's just kind of in the middle. But 9%, I think, is probably why. Maybe. What the hell is that about?
My model loves him.
Yeah.
My model absolutely loves him.
Top 10 in approach, sure. I caramba though, the guy doesn't Cleveland, doesn't Ohio get pretty sweaty? I don't know.
Potentially. I mean, why does Nick even need to be on the show? I'm just agreeing with every single pick that he's given.
Yeah, that would have been the shortest show in history, dude.
Jordan Spieth, you've already mentioned why you're not on him. I think he's okay. I don't know if I necessarily want to be overweight to him. I certainly understand why somebody's trying to create leverage with him. I probably prefer that route to the Justin Thomas stance.
With his wrist, Spencer, as well, at a place like this, I'm not interested. Yeah. If it's like Texas with wispy rough, I'm better with that.
Yeah, Lowry, I think we're both yes on him. And then the fades, we'll just fire through these very quickly. We don't need to go through every single name. I'll just try to point out the ones we haven't talked about. We've talked about why Oberg is no. Corey Connors, we haven't talked about him on the show.
I'm out. Congratulations on your amazing putting performance in Canada to get you your first non-top 5 performance and your first top 10 in a long time. So congratulations. I will let you do that. I'm out.
I think he's great for cash.
Yeah.
Probably not the route I want to go elsewhere. He is fading Bezadenhout. I think we both like Bezadenhout this week, so there's a little bit of a difference there. He is fading Cantlay and Hovland. You've talked about Hovland, of the reasons why you like him. I'm indifferent on the Cantlay play. I think the problem is Cantlay gets a lot of ownership because of the history you have here. And if you want to talk about players trending in the wrong direction with Spieth, like Cantlay is doing a lot of those same metrics in his build, and he's getting saved where Spieth is not. So I think from Nick's specific structure of how he's building it, it does make a lot of sense for why one player is creating leverage for him and the other one, I guess, is going the opposite direction.
Who was his 10K guy that he's going overweight on?
Xander.
And that's it. That's his only guy.
He's fading Rory. He's fading Hovland. I assume that means he's playing Scheffler even to where it is, and that probably is where I would.
It's a third of the field. He's going to play third. Like
I have a hard
probably go.
I have a hard time
Xander.
not putting Scheffler in though. Like if I'm being honest, like I don't know how you remove him.
I just don't. I'm trying stuff. I'm trying. Like I did enter a $5 into a big 50K payout contest with the Scotty Scheffler lineup, though. So I will put it out there because he will be the optimal. So
yeah,
why not throw him in there and just have a little bit of exposure to Scotty? And by the way, I'm doing the repeated Scotty top 5 bet, which is just cashing like ridiculous, right?
Yeah,
and that's minus
like
115.
You're like up 1 million units doing that, I think, right now.
Yeah, just bet whatever. It's the mortgage play of the day, brought to you by Scotty Scheffler.
He is fading Ben on. I'm fine with Ben on. I don't have a reason why I would. I think the ownership is low enough that I don't have an issue. The market hates him. I understand that, but there's low enough ownership that I'd be in there. He's fading Zalatoris. I am also fading Zalatoris. I know you talked about being on Zalatoris. We did not talk about Hideki. He is fading Hideki.
Not playing Hideki the week before a major with his injury track record now.
I think that's probably a fair sentiment. And then the last one, he's fading Wyndham Clark. I'm fading Wyndham Clark. You're playing Wyndham Clark. Thigala.
I tried on Thigala, each way on Thigala, playing Thigala. Oh, hail Thigala.
I lean. I think he is too expensive. I think the ownership makes him a fun target. I can't get myself to say I'm fading a sub 10% version of Thigala. So no. I have no issues with him. The last question we take, unless we get a couple more as we're exiting here. Tom Kim for cash, no.
No, go do like a Shane Lowry instead. Like if you're looking for guys that have really solid like top 20 rate, Shane Lowry, 47% top 20 rate. That's 15% more than Tom Kim. I know Tom's getting his stuff together, but Shane's typically just way more consistent and way more reliable. Keegan Bradley. Tom's just like, he's still like a little bit of a teenager that's kind of living in the basement and not quite sure what you're going to get, So in my opinion,
like
I still like him.
Obviously, I don't know what James's build exactly looks like and what players are in there currently. And, Lowry might be a name that he can consider based off of that. But I see no reason to not want to play Siwoo Kim and Keegan Bradley. Like,
sorry, obvious pivot.
Yeah, yes. like the ownership's not going to matter in those spots. Ownership means 0 for cash builds. Like, take the ownership and don't even run it compared to anything. Like, just figure out who your best players are and play your best players.
Yeah, like you running an optimizers are built for cash game.
Yeah,
because it's finding your value and just shoving as much value in there as you can. And Siwoo is there. Hell yeah.
I agree. So we will let everybody get out of here. Obviously, Byron, I appreciate you joining us here. Tell everybody where they can find your work. You talked a little bit about the Mayo stuff, but if you can, talk about the Roto-Bowler.
Yeah, at the Model Maniac on X. I think I've been saying that pretty nicely now. X is a pretty fluid thing off my tongue. Back 9 Bets is where my YouTube channel is, but also I've jumped all my stuff to Mayo Media Network on my Tuesday show, which is awesome. I saw I've got a whole new audience over there, and we kind of just linking up all these communities and kind of making a nice little web of love. So yeah, go grab me at the Model Maniac and go check out all my stuff at Roto-Baller and use code Maniac there for yourself, 10% off. We really would love to have you on the team. This Win Daily Roto-Baller thing is a quite nice dynamic going on.
Yeah, I feel like I have successfully merged both worlds into one with this, and Win Daily, like shout out to them and everything that they have going on. Like they have great stuff that they release in their Discord too. So, uh,
Oh, yes.
there's a lot of amazing information that is out there in the space. And, we would love for you to join. And obviously, Byron and I do it together at Rotoballer, but Win Daily's putting out great stuff themselves. But,
Mhm.
the one difference between you and I, Byron, above anything else, is you have transitioned to saying X. Old habits die hard with me, and I am always going to say Twitter. So you can find Nick on Twitter at SticksPicks. We'll hopefully be back next week together. I am at Tee Off Sports. If you have any questions about the week from any perspective, you can reach out to us there. Feel free to reach out to Byron on his handle, anything that he does. Check out his shows. And as I said at the beginning, use the code BGP to get to a $250 match bonus over on Underdog. That site is buzzing with the different sports that they have. Talked about the pick 8 where you can win 325 times your money.
Yes.
Underdog has everything that you need to gain traction and action for any event and any sport that you want to do. So we really appreciate all the support that you show us on this show. I know Byron and I will speak for him here that we appreciate all the support that you show us over at Rotoballer. So if you're not doing so already, be sure to check that out. And we will see everyone back here again next week.